You're listening to episode 144 of the D6 Podcast.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here's your hosts, Ron Hunter and Jeremy Lee.
This is the family ministry podcast that helps you
Connect your
church and home. I just put you on the spot. I
You
had
did.
to. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm looking forward to our day together with Timothy Paul Jones and Jeremy Carlson.
It's TPJ Day.
TPJ, you said that last week with the other episode.
Hey, listen, here is the thing about him that I say this every time. I feel like he might be one of our most frequent guests. Mm-hmm. We love to tell everybody he's one of the most sought-out breakout speakers at the conferences. His breakouts are always full. We say that all the time.
And
it's true.
And by the way, it's one thing to say his breakouts are always full, but we always put him in the biggest room, and they're still always full. That says something.
I think it's because he has the unique ability to take the complicated and speak it in a simple way, and that's what he's going to be doing today with our topic.
He does, and I think you'll understand the wow factor if you've not heard him. If you've heard him in the past, then you're eager.
Yes, we will be talking to him soon, talking about dealing with biblical literacy, illiteracy among kids.
I did that last week.
But before we move much further, we have been talking so much about D6 Days coming up very soon, February 11th through 13th. You can go to d6days.com to sign up. It's basically a free conference to give you a taste of what our live conference is like.
That's right.
This is an online version of it. This year, it's going to be on demand. So cool. With tons of great speakers. We've kind of gone over them and introduced them every week. But one of the things we want to make sure you guys know is that in honor of D6 Days, you guys are opening up your online resource called D6 Plus. So I think it's a good time to tell people about that real quick so they can know, because it's not always open.
No, people have to sign up and wait until we open it. And we only open it up, I think, 3 times a year. And this is one of those times where you can take a look at it, jump in. But D6 Plus is a resource that makes your ministry life a lot easier, as it provides teacher training, volunteer training. It provides parental tools that you can pass along. And all of this is generic, meaning there's no branding on it. It looks like it comes from you. And so you've got a whole toolbox of topics that if a parent bumps into it and says, hey, I don't know how to explain racism to my kids. We just talked about, Martin Luther King last week. Or 2 weeks ago. I don't know how to explain racism. Well, jump into our toolbox, find that topic, shoot it off to them, give them that tool to help them understand and deal with those topics. And there's over 200 other topics in there. But here's the cool factor. We're not going to make you sign up and commit to a year, 2 years. Jeremy, you said this a long time ago, and I've never forgot it. If I can't earn your business, I don't want to keep it. And so when you sign up month to month. You can buy it by the month, by the quarter. You can pay a year. But we think you're going to find that so exciting, like so many of our other customers do, and it comes with so many benefits, discounts and perks, and there's free gifts that will just show up out of the blue that we didn't even tell you about.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've been in there and checked it out, and I went in just yesterday, actually. And the Media Vault, especially, I just want to speak to that.
Go for it.
It is so full of awesome content, and you guys don't just, you give some of the new stuff, but you take them back to the old stuff. There really would not be a need for you to bring in a live guest speaker. Really, you have more content than you probably could ever show and display to your volunteers, parents, and leaders. It's a
And
cool
let me give you one there, because somebody asked me recently, so what's your favorite all-time main stage? Well, first of all, I can't think in singles, but I said one of them you need to go back and check out, I think was year 2009 or 10. I could be off on that a year, but Fred Stoker.
Yes.
He and Stephen Arterburn wrote the Every Man's Battle books together, but he did a topic called Doing Book with Your Child. It's one of my favorites that still to this day stands out in my mind. So if you've got access to the Media Vault, you can go back and find very similar topics like that as well as that one.
Oh, man, it's going to be a great day. So, all right, it's time to get going with TPJ. We will have Timothy Paul Jones after the break.
Practical Family Ministry is a collection of ideas for your church that offers practical and encouraging advice to those who want to make an impact in family ministry. Readers are reminded of the God-designed channels through which discipleship should occur, the church and the home. Parents, as well as ministry leaders, will be equipped to do their part to carry out the spiritual discipline of discipleship. Visit d6family.com to order your copy today.
Well, I say this every time he comes on, but our guest today, Timothy Paul Jones, is easily one of the most popular breakout speakers here at this conference. Every time. Were your rooms full again this year?
They were pretty full, so
yeah,
it's good to see a good group of people.
Well, I know that because your breakouts are full, that means people are going to love hearing from you on this podcast. Now, if you don't know who Timothy Paul Jones is, he's the professor of family ministry and apologetics at, and here we go again, you're my second person today, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He also serves as pastor at Sojourn Community Church. He's authored or edited more than a dozen books in the fields of apologetics and family ministry. Tons of books like Family Ministry Field Guide, award winners, Christian History Made Easy, and How We Got the Bible. And we're going to kind of try to talk about that today. I always try to break off some of the harder stuff for you because I feel like you can handle it. And today I want to go with the theme, dealing with biblical illiteracy among kids. We live in a YouTube generation. We live in my boys, guilty as charged, PS4 and YouTube, they love it. And the kids are reading less and less in general. And so when you throw in the fact that the Bible doesn't really set it up like an easy page-turning novel for kids, that becomes a struggle. And you've written a little bit on this topic. So I'd like to start with this. How would you introduce the book of the Bible to a student for the first time? How would you begin teaching them how to read it? If they're a kid or a child and they've never read it before, but they're able to read, how do we introduce this book to them?
Right. And I think there's one of those things that we have to think of in two different ways. One of them for those kids whose parents are reading the Bible, and one of them for the kids whose parents aren't reading the Bible.
Cool.
That's going to be a very, very different thing that we do, but I think there's one common element. You learn to read the Bible by seeing somebody read the Bible and hearing somebody read the Bible. That's one of the most important things. Is I think about in my own life, because I really reflected on this when I read this question, and I think of my own life. One of the things that most impacted me was I would walk out in the morning and I would see my dad sitting at a table reading the Bible. I would see that. And that image sticks with me, just seeing him sitting there at the table. He would never or rarely talk about what he was reading, but I saw him doing it. And that had an impact on my life. And I want us to understand that if somebody doesn't see the Bible read, they probably aren't going to pick up reading the Bible naturally. So with that in mind, I think about the fact of if that kid their parents don't read the Bible, you know that they're never going to walk into the living room and see a parent reading the Bible. One of the things we have to do is to make time to help them see and experience the reading of the Bible. And what I think that means at a very nuts and bolts practical level, something I've done as a pastor, is when I have a kid who I know their parents weren't reading the Bible with them, that's just not going to happen, to go somewhere, and I would usually take them to McDonald's or somewhere like that, or at a coffee shop later on when that became more popular, and actually sit down and read the Bible in a very simple way. We'll say, I would even jokingly say, all right, do you want to be the odd person or the even person? And read the Bible verse by verse. One person read the odd verses, one person read the even, back and forth, and read a chapter and talk about it. And to teach them how to read the Bible, because it doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come easily for people. They've got to see it happen. Now, the interesting thing is, I've actually brought that into, shifting gears to the idea of parents who are reading the Bible, I've actually brought that into my own life with my girls. I've got 4 daughters, and as they've been growing up, one of those things that I do is every single week, one of them goes with me to a coffee shop, and we do that exact same pattern. I read a verse, you read a verse, I read a verse, you read a verse. We talk about it together, and simply, what am I doing in that? I'm modeling it. I want them to read the Bible. Here's a couple of other things that I've found in my own life is I actually have stopped reading the Bible off digital devices. And it's not because I'm against that. It's not because I think it's bad. It's because I want my children to see me reading the Bible. I think they have to see us do that for them to pick that up. I just think that's important for us to recognize the way people will start reading the Bible is seeing someone read the Bible. One last thing in that I think is important, just again, in my own life. My dad was not raised as a Christian. My dad became a believer later in life. He had been an alcoholic. There had been all sorts of things. Much of this happened before I was even born. But I do remember hearing one thing from my mom and my sisters, that after my dad made a profession of faith in Christ, after that happened, one of the first things that he did is said, we as a family have to start reading the Bible. And so he sat down and started in the morning reading the one chapter of the Bible in the morning, King James Version, to us or with us in the morning. And here's what I think is important is not that this was such a smashing success. By the time I came along as a child, this was hit and miss. It didn't always go well. It didn't always go successfully, but he kept trying it. He kept trying. And he did what he knew to do, which is that I need to make sure my family is hearing and reading the Bible. And I think about that it wasn't successful in the sense of it wasn't something I necessarily looked forward to. It wasn't something where there were life-changing invitations at the end of this. It was boring and mundane. But it stuck with me that my dad, though that was not successful by any human standard, he kept at it. He kept at it. And I want to encourage parents, your children may not pick it up. It may seem like this is boring. It may seem like this is terrible. And it may be boring and terrible at times. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But keep at it. Keep at it. Keep going. And God gives fruit to that in the future. And not only does God give fruit to that in the future, but there's something else to do with that. And it's simply that will stick with your children, that even though it didn't go well, you kept trying. So keep at it.
Yeah, and that's great, by the way. Thank you. And at some point, we have to begin to tell them how the book was assembled. Because if you don't know the story behind it, it can be a little confusing, right? And plus, obviously, if you don't understand the power behind it. So could you help the parents who go, yeah, I really don't even know myself, or I don't know how I would explain it to a child. Would you help them? Because I know you've written extensively on it.
Here's one of the things that I think if we tell it well, actually, kids find this fascinating. Just even little things like how was it written, what was it written on, and the alphabets of Greek and Hebrew and things like that. So my encouragement is to know that even if you say, I don't know anything about this and I feel really awkward, let me give you this encouragement. Once you start finding out things about it, it's things that your kids will actually find interesting. When you tell your kids about how the Dead Sea Scrolls were found and all of the things that went through for the Dead Sea Scrolls to get passed from one set of hands to another and the things like that, that ends up being really fascinating if you tell your kids about things like that and then point to how the Bible was put together. So my encouragement, first off, is know there's some really fascinating stories that are out there. Now, how do you get to those stories on that? Now, I actually hate doing what I'm getting ready to do, but I don't know of any other way to do it. I wanted children and youth to understand this story, and I couldn't find a book that told the story well, so I wrote one, and that's the book, How We Got the Bible. And one of the deals that I made with talking to the publisher about this is if we're going to do this, every single page is going to be full color with pictures on it. Every page of this book. And they did it. They did this, did a great job of every page full color with pictures because that's what I wanted. And I couldn't find it because it's such a fascinating story. It really is a fascinating story of how we got the Bible. And so my encouragement is recognize there are good stories about it. get my book and look at that, read that.
And you don't ever say that. So,
right.
But I understand why you're saying it.
Because I couldn't really find anything like that. And some other things that I found that kids find actually really fascinating is learn the Hebrew alphabet. And help them write their name in Hebrew. Learn the Greek alphabet. Help them write their name in the Greek characters. In that, kids find that fascinating. They find it really, really interesting to do that. I even do one little game with kids that they always find interesting in a class when I'm doing this. I want them to understand, why do we end up with copying variations in the Bible? And so what I'll do is I'll read something out loud to them and have them each copy it as best they can. And then I will, during that week, rip up that into pieces and fragments and all that and bring it back the next week and have them try to assemble that from what they wrote down. And then I'll also myself write a few extra things in and toss it in and mix it in. And then I'll use that to help them understand that's what we have to do when we reassemble biblical manuscripts, is what you just tried to do. Do you understand now why sometimes there's copying variations, and how amazing it is that the Bible is so consistent and the manuscripts are so well preserved, with it being preserved by handwriting and sometimes fragments. One other thing, there's something that's happened over the past couple of years that actually makes this job a lot easier for you. If you can make it to Washington, D.C., go to the Museum of the Bible, because the Museum of the Bible helps you to become aware of these things and your children in a way that is absolutely fascinating. And they have done an amazing job in Washington, D.C. at the Museum of the Bible. There are ways to do this. Get the book that I mentioned, the book that I did, How We Got the Bible. Do little things like little projects and things like that. Go to Museum of the Bible. And all those things like that will help your kids get a vision for that. There's one other thing I would say of a really good book. Champ Thornton has written a book called The Radical Book for Kids. And he's got some chapters in there that are fun and easy to read with some good graphics and everything like that on how we got the Bible. Get the resources, figure out ways to do this. But know this, every time I've tried to teach this to a child, once they start to see that these ancient things, it's kind of like this Indiana Jones archaeology type interest, things like that, they actually get pretty interested in it once you start explaining it to them.
This is all so good. All right, so what about the actually navigating the format of the Bible? Because kids don't really have a lot of books that are broken up in chapter and verse, and the New Testament, Old Testament. Do you find it helpful to just kind of help them kind of know how to navigate that?
Yeah. One of the things that I do with our kids is their first time through the Bible story, not a full Bible, but through the story of the Bible, is through the Action Bible. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's the Action Bible. It's a great comic book version of the Bible. And so I take them through that first, and I have them read that all the way through. And here's why I do that, is because I want them to be able to understand the big storyline of the Bible, so that when they read a real Bible, so to speak, that they're able to figure out where those things fit. So that's why I do that. Take them through a comic book Bible first. There's a couple of different ones out there. David C. Cook had one years ago that was more of a classic drawings, old type. Then the Action Bible, this newer one, really looks full of action. It really does. It looks like a superhero comic book. But whatever you use, take them through a comic book Bible first. And help them to understand that. So I took our child that's 11 now, so I started her through that probably when she was 6 or 7. She went through that 2 or 3 times, and she'll still pull out her Action Bible off the shelf to kind of get her bearings when she's reading something in the Bible or to review a story. She'll pull that out because she knows that. She has read that so many times that she knows it well. And so she'll be able to find her place. And the funny thing is sometimes she has some memory issues and some things like that. Sometimes when she is trying to remember a Bible story, she will not be able at first to come up with the words, but she will be able to describe for me the picture in the Action Bible. Wow. And then here's what happens. The words come to her as she's remembering the picture. It's put it in her mind in that way. So I think start them out with a comic book Bible. Some kids really find it profitable for you then to get them a book, a version of the Bible, a reader's version that has no chapters and no verses and things like that, to help them read it as a story, to really help them read it that way. Some kids that's helpful for, some it's not so helpful for in that. But I think starting them with a comic book Bible and then moving them into a regular Bible, kind of slowly moving them into it, is really helpful for a whole lot of kids.
That's super good, super good. Okay, in today's world, like we mentioned earlier, it's hard to get a student to stop looking at their screen long enough to read any book, much less the Bible. So can parents address their students, or how can parents address their students when they say that the Bible is boring and they just don't understand it?
I think there's two different levels of this. So the big picture is, I think we as parents have to be active and engaged in limiting our kids' addiction to the screen. We really have to do that. So I'm not saying everybody has to have the same rules we have in our household. We have a couple of different rules in our household. There's one movie a week, as only one movie. 2 TV shows a week is what we're limited to. And the other thing is always digital devices and digital media has to be consumed in community. That is to say, it's not just one person doing it by himself or herself. It's as a group of us together. So we consume it in community. Not saying every family needs to do that. That's just what our family does. That's our limitations on our screen devices. So I would encourage parents first to think of the ways that work for your family to address and to limit certain things in that. But I think at another level, let's think about for a little bit Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, Twilight, over the past decade, some different ones. If a story is compelling, kids still read. They still do in that. And so I think that what makes kids not read is when the story isn't compelling to them, when it's not part of something bigger. Now, how does that have to do with the Bible? Well, I think if we help them to understand the Bible as one big, amazing story and them to fit the different parts of the Bible in to a big, amazing story that God is up to, they really are able to get it at that point. Because Harry Potter, when it really began to, I'm not saying, I know some people have different views of Harry Potter. I'm not trying to promote it or not promote it. I'm simply using this as an example of how kids really got into this. By the time about halfway through, when it was clear this was part of a massive, big story that was being told, people were lining up at the bookstores when that 4th, 5th book came out. And when the last book, the 7th one, came out, that was huge. I mean, kids were waiting and waiting, couldn't wait to get that. And the books are still selling well. Well, I think that's, again, transfer that over to the Bible. When we really start thinking about that the Bible is one big story, and we help them to understand that it's unfolding slowly over time, and it culminates in Jesus, and it points us toward what God is going to do someday in the future, if we help them to see that and we read it that way, then the children will be drawn into that larger story. When kids aren't interested in the Bible is when we treat it as a set of isolated moralistic tales that aren't connected to each other. Interestingly, sometimes we think the way to make the Bible relevant is to make it where it's these moralistic stories. The story of Daniel and the lion's den becomes about be courageous, or the story of David and Goliath becomes all about just be brave and slay the giants in your life. In that, those are tempting things to do. But that's actually, I think, what turns kids off to the Bible, because they see it as these isolated tales or fables that are just about learning a good moral lesson. But if we help them to see, for example, that the story of David is David going into battle against a giant, and we help them to see that it describes the giant as having scales on his armor, and when they begin to see that word for scales points back to a serpent, and that David cuts off the giant's head, and that is an echo of what God says in Genesis chapter 3, where it says that the serpent's head will be crushed.
Holy
and it
smokes.
Connects backwards to that.
I didn't know that.
It points forward to Jesus,
So
who is
cool.
going to go into battle against Satan and crush the power of Satan.
Wow.
Suddenly, that story takes on a new life because it's part of something bigger than itself. When we look at Daniel and we think about that Daniel, it's not just about Daniel prays, gets thrown into the lion's den. Daniel is interceding on behalf of his people. He is falsely accused and falsely convicted of a crime. He is put in a cave, and a stone is rolled over the door of the cave. But then when the stone is rolled back, the one who they thought would be dead turns out to be alive, and it points forward to Jesus. If we help them to read the Bible that way, it becomes part of a big and beautiful story. That's how we have to help them read the Bible. And if they're reading the Bible in that way, then what they begin to see is this whole thing, that it's a big story that all makes sense and connects together. And far from it becoming irrelevant, that's when it becomes exciting and very relevant for their lives.
God, we're having church up in here. This is awesome. I mean, I genuinely, I've been to seminary and not heard that, and that in particular will stick with me. Thank you. Well, we've got a lot of other things that we could talk about. I really want to make sure, though, that we introduce them to the resources that you have available. You've already talked about how we got the Bible, but you also have 4 Views of End Times, Christian History Made Easy, which I think is another one that is a fabulous resource. So do you have a new project? I mean, you've always got a project, so I want to just, we can talk about what you've done, but I'd love to hear what you're doing.
So what I'm working on right now is actually a book called Why Should I Trust the Bible? That's nice. The one that I'm writing right now, that is written, actually intended to be given to somebody in high school or college who is considering atheism or unbelief. So they're struggling with why should I believe the Bible? And so that's Why Should I Trust the Bible is the name of that. So that one's what I'm working on right now. The next book that I'm working on after that I've mapped out is one on the apologetics that the church used in the 2nd century. And it's not going to be an academic book, it's more for lay people, but it's going to help introduce some lay people to church history. But one of the interesting things is, in the 2nd century, one of the major proofs that they have for the Christian faith is the goodness and the kindness of Christians. And so I want to help us to reintroduce this idea that one of the primary apologetics for the truth of Scripture ought to be how we are kind and generous to the people around us, to the world around us. That was actually the number one apologetics argument that was being made by the apologists defending the truth of the faith in the 2nd century. And I want to work through some practical ways that we can recover that in the church today.
Wow. There you go. Sneak peek of coming attractions, and those sound awesome. I can't wait to see them. Hey, guys, this is Dr. Timothy Paul Jones, seminary professor, author, but just, again, I say it every time you come. You make the complicated clear, and that is such a gift. Thank you, and I thank God for you. If you guys want to check out more of what he has to offer, you can go to timothypauljones.com. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's always great to be with you.
Are you looking for the right conference to attend this year? The D6 Conference is a family ministry conference designed for your entire ministry team. Come hear from over 30 speakers and network with churches that share your passion for reaching families. Family ministry isn't just another program. It's one of the most important things your church can do to make a difference in your city. At the D6 Conference, you'll be inspired and equipped to take your family ministry to the next level. To learn more about the D6 Conference, just go to d6conference.com.
The reason why we have Timothy Paul Jones on the episode, as Jeremy said, possibly more frequently than anybody else, we're trying to figure out if we can exhaust his knowledge.
And we're struggling on that front.
We have yet to run into a dead end. I mean, truly, and the depth in which he can speak on various topics related to family ministry and Christian leadership is phenomenal. So thank you, Dr. Jones.
It was funny, you brought out, as we were discussing this episode, you kind of brought out this irony that Dr. Timothy Paul Jones was talking about illiteracy and helping engage the written word with kids. But now we're going to kind of transition, because we're going to not talk about written word. We're going to talk about actually movies and Christian movies. We have a Jeremy Carlson who works in that industry and has done a ton of great movies. In fact, he kind of talks about the Indivisible movie, if y'all haven't heard of that one.
Correct. And, oftentimes movies will slant our perspective on true history, and I'm thankful that we have people like Jeremy and this team to bring us out some solid, accurate depictions rather than traditions that lead us off the written page. So, and they do it so well, too.
And this movie, Indivisible, that he's going to be talking to us about, that is one that you'll hear in the interview. We kind of talk about it being in the theater, but now it is actually available probably digitally.
Correct. Yes.
In other formats.
That's
it's not
right.
in the theater anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think we should jump in and hear from Jeremy and Michael Bain, who did this interview.
Yep. Let's roll it.
One of the great things about being at D6, and you know this because you go to a lot of conferences, is you get to meet all kinds of people involved in ministry at all levels. And so I'm so excited to be here with you, Jeremy. This is Jeremy Carlson, and he is really plugged into marketing, the movies, the movie industry, Christian films. And so let's just go ahead and start there. Anytime somebody works with movies, I want to know, well, what did you work on?
Yeah.
So let's go there. Tell us a few movies that you've worked on recently.
Yeah, so I spent about 13 months working on the movie I Can Only Imagine, which came out a few months ago, which was
incredible.
Third most successful Christian film of all time. So I worked on that. I worked on War Room, which came out a few years ago. God's Not Dead, God's Not Dead 2, Do You Believe, Woodlawn. The list goes on and on. I've worked on, 16 movies the past 6 years.
And obviously, you're not behind the camera. You're not writing the scripts.
No.
But explain to folks what you're trying, the critical piece. Because a lot of these films don't have the same budget.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at any Disney film that comes out, we're talking mega millions behind it in marketing.
Yep.
With a force behind it. So kind of explain to people your role in that process.
Yeah, with faith-based films, because we have a smaller budget, we have to go out and find our audience.
Yeah.
So it's more grassroots marketing. So specifically, we'll go to ministry events like this. We'll work with churches and ministries, trying to let them know how they can use the movie as a tool. It's something more than just entertainment.
Yes.
So that it can be an aid to their ministry.
Totally. So, why is the creative process of believers in telling our story, the creative process of making these films, for Christians to take these, honestly, risky financial investments to create these pieces? There are art and there are story. Why does it matter? Why is it critical to us engaging culture right now?
Well, because there's a whole lot of people that are never stepped foot in a church, but they're in a movie theater once a month. I think it's 80 million people will go to a movie theater once a month.
Yeah.
So if we're not engaging culture where they are, how are we going to reach them?
Totally.
So with us, specifically when we work with churches, it's easy for someone to invite someone to a movie theater, and then that can be the segue into inviting them to a church.
Yeah, to start a conversation, build habit. Now, you're in the industry, kind of help pastors understand the impact of a movie and the impact that you guys saw even from a movie like I Can Only Imagine. Kind of walk through some of those real results of a movie like that, or War Room, things that you saw practically happen that directly impacted the kingdom of God. What are some things you saw?
Like a movie like War Room, what the Kendrick brothers did, they're the guys that made the movie. They made Courageous, Fireproof, before that, Flywheel. They wanted to make a movie for the church to encourage people to pray. And that movie lit a fire in people and in churches across this country to start a movement of prayer. Like a movie like I Can Only Imagine, it was a true story. So everybody knew the song. It's the single best-selling Christian single of all time.
Yeah.
So just to kind of pull back the curtain and tell Bart's story of what happened in his life and how that song came to be. I'll tell you a quick story. The first time I showed that movie, it was at a denominational meeting. There was 14,000 people there, and we had 400 people stick around for a 10 o'clock screening. And I had a line of 25 people at midnight that wanted to talk to me about it because that movie stirred something in them. It's a movie about the relationship with his father. It's a movie how the song was written. Everybody had an emotion that song meant to them.
Yeah.
And the last person in the room was a 21-year-old kid that hadn't seen his dad in 15 years.
Whoa.
So it's 12:30 in the morning. I'm beat from being in a booth all day, and he's just weeping to me in this huge convention center all by himself. because after seeing that movie, he felt God telling him he needed to forgive his dad.
Oh, that's powerful.
And so while we make the movies for entertainment, there's so much more ministry that goes into this. And that's how churches can help us, is because they are for entertainment, but people can invite someone to a movie theater that wouldn't come to a church.
Totally. So let's talk about that for a minute. Like, so I'm a pastor. What are practical things? Kind of give insight. Like, how does a church help? You guys who have a movie and want to get it out there, like we've all gotten stuff in the mail. We've seen that. We see that come to our church. Just talk about practically how pastors can better like leverage these films to advance and to share the message of Jesus.
Yeah, a lot of times with movies, we do what we call an influencer screening, probably 4 months before the movie comes to theaters, where sometimes a pastor will get an email from one of us, and it'll say, hey, come to this free screening of this movie. We do those so pastors and leaders can see the movie ahead of time, because we understand that they're not going to do something with a group in their church without seeing the movie. So we want them to see it ahead of time. We want them to hear what the ministry impact could be. And the biggest thing for churches is to support them on opening weekend.
Why? Why open? I mean, unpack that so people understand.
Yeah, so movie theaters, it's a business. So they're not Christian organizations, and so they're not governed by, oh, this is a movie that can impact so many people. It needs to stay in theaters. It's dollars and cents to them. So they need to see how many people are going to the movie theater that first weekend. That depends on how many people are going to, how many movie screens it's going to be on the next week and the next week and the next week. And so the more people that support it on the first weekend, the more
multiply.
It multiplies out.
So it spreads out through the community. So if people see a movie, and I love that, like you really do, would you agree with this, that one of the critical things is if you don't believe in it, if you don't like, you don't have to embrace every movie that comes out, but like if you do see one that catches your eye, get behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one movie I'm working on right now is called Indivisible. Comes out the end of October. It is a true story of a military chaplain and his wife and their relationship. And in that movie, it tells the story of when he's gone at war and what it's like to be a chaplain with the soldiers. And then you also see the flip side of his wife at home and what it's like to be the spouse of a soldier.
Wow.
And so that movie was made specifically to help uplift and help pull back the curtain of what it's like in the military, what it's like to be a chaplain, and what our soldiers actually go through. So we made that movie on purpose so that people can support the military. Like with that, we're doing date nights where people can donate money and actually send an active duty service member to go to the movie. And so that's the way we're trying to help reach people.
Yeah, totally. So I have to ask this. We've got a few minutes left. Tell me your favorite story of a movie you've worked on that you've personally seen. Like, this fires me up. Like, this happened. This blows me away. The potential of this.
Yeah, I would say, like, I Can Only Imagine it's one of the most successful Christian films of all time. So that one, there's a whole lot of stories, like I shared about that kid. That, I had a big, huge 7-foot-tall biker that was crying to me at another event because it was just the story of the fatherhood wound and what that actually means to so many people. With God's Not Dead, that was a movie that came out like 5.5 years ago.
Now we've got God Dead to what, 2 and
2.5-ish or 3.
Whatever happened.
And so
that's a movie. That's what happens with a successful movie. Then.
Yeah. And so that one became a brand. And with that movie in particular, I saw countless students become saved at that film.
Wow, yeah.
Because that movie encouraged students to stand up for what they believe in, but also to know what they believe, which I think apologetics and that whole topic is something that is so important in today's day and age.
Oh, that's so great. Well, thank you for what you do. So you're working on what the movie's called Indivisible?
Indivisible.
Yeah, and it comes out
October 26th, theaters nationwide.
And they can find that. Talk about the website. Is it Indivisible Movie?
IndivisibleMovie.com. There's resources on there that you can put your zip code in there and find the closest theater to you that's playing and buy tickets. We'll have tickets up in the next 2 weeks.
Well, what's really encouraging about this is, better yet, that every pastor listening to this is going to get to hear you and know that there are real people behind this who want to advance. This is not about making a buck. There are easier ways to make $1
for sure
than making a faith-based film. Every once in a while it hits, we're thankful, just as one pastor telling you, thank you for what you're doing. And for everybody listening out there, share it, go to movies, show up, support the movement. So,
that's it. We don't do it without you guys.
That's right. So, well, Jeremy, thank you for being here and sharing a little bit of your story.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, our thanks go out to Jeremy and Timothy Paul Jones. Another great week on the D6 podcast. Hey, next week we have another great show for you.
That's right. Richard Ross, Dr. Richard Ross.
Another, like Timothy Paul Jones. I think they are in competition along with Brian Haynes for our most. We need to count this up. We need to kind of like have
We do.
About the most podcast appearances. Between those three, I think we will find a winner.
It's like they have their own column in our podcast.
That's right. And then another one that I just love so much because I'm a sports dad and I have so many issues. In fact, David Prince will be with us next week. And I remember I genuinely took him out in the hallway after the interview and just asked him about 14 different questions about being a sports dad because I had so many questions. You will enjoy David Prince. He kind of specializes in the sports parenting world, but he also kind of gave us a neat little interview for next week that's a little bit different, and I think you'll enjoy it. Hope you guys have a great week of ministry.
And we'll see you then.
You've been listening to the D6 podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.